The EU-Canada Free Trade Agreement gets a final green light from the European Parliament, boosting the prospect of more jobs for both economies. Debating the future of Europe, the clash with the populists, and the drive to make the EU matter to more Europeans. Fighting terrorism, Parliament backs a report calling for stepped-up coordination EU-wide. And debate on renewed fighting in eastern Ukraine, with calls to consider new sanctions against Russia.
Hello and welcome to our roundup of the European Parliament's latest plenary session here in Strasbourg. We begin with the EU-Canada Trade Pact known as CETA. It's been a long road, and proponents say worth the wait.
It took 7 years of negotiations to get CETA to the final Parliament vote. Critics contend it will strip away Europe's labor, consumer, and environmental rules and cost jobs. But the EPP Group's Artis Pabriks, rapporteur of the report, says CETA does maintain those protections.
Trade is important for our exporters, trade is important for our employees. Europe cannot be sustainable without trade. CETA is a golden standard which will help us to show to the world that we are open to the trade and to other nations despite of voice of protectionism.
Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau showed his appreciation and support for that openness in a visit to the European Parliament the day after the vote.
The anxiety people have toward the economy and trade, the worry that our kids won't have access to the same jobs and opportunities that we had, can be addressed only if we ensure that trade is inclusive so that everyone benefits. And this agreement, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, delivers just that. Because at its heart, CETA is a framework for trade that works for everyone.
The European Commission estimates the trade deal will save European exporters more than €500 million in tariffs a year. And as with previous trade deals, that means more jobs. Pabriks gives an example in his home country, Latvia.
And it is similar in most of EU countries. Every sixth worker is dependent on export outside the European Union. That basically means that if we do not have these exports, we cannot sustain our jobs and we cannot sustain our families.
CETA also lowers trade barriers by guaranteeing market access and creating a level playing field for businesses. It protects farmers by preserving 145 European geographical indications.
If you are a handmade chocolate producer, you will get inside in this market because your qualifications which were passed in Europe will fit also for Canada.
While CETA now goes to the EU 28 parliaments for approval, the EU-level provisions become law, including the tariff reductions. To Europe's exporters, large and small, Pabriks says,
your prices on the Canadian shelves will decrease for your products between 8 to 12%. This is a difference on tariffs.
On to a look ahead for the European Union. Where are we going? Where should we go? Parliament debated the future of the EU, and there were sharp differences.
It was a confrontation between pro-Europeans and Eurosceptics in a decisive year. With crucial national elections ahead in the Netherlands, France, and Germany, there were repeated claims that the EU has no future and calls for new initiatives to show voters that it's better to take on today's crises together than apart. The EPP Group's Elmar Brok was co-rapporteur of the report on the future of Europe.
Bei den rechten und linken Europagegnern sieht man immer, sie fordern Lösungen, verweigern aber konstant die Instrumente, damit die Lösungen erreicht werden wollen. Das heißt, sie wollen die Lösungen nicht. Sie wollen, dass unsere Bürger nicht eine Lösung bekommen, damit sie auf dieser Unruhe heraus ihr Brötchen backen können.
EPP Group Chairman Manfred Weber says the group's report on Europe's future gives job creation top priority.
Jobs are the most important thing for the European Union. We need, especially for our young generation, new jobs. And that's why innovation is the most important field, and keeping the single market alive is the most important thing. And these are the elements which are inside of our Future of Europe reports, to keep what we achieved already and to invest in modern technologies.
In the debate, Brok also argued that the claims of undermining sovereignty are unfounded. On the contrary.
In vielen Bereichen ist der Nationalstaat zu schwach, die Souveränität für die eigenen Bürger in dieser globalen Ordnung durchzusetzen. Und Europa heißt nicht, nationale Souveränität zu vernichten. Europa heißt, über Europa die Souveränität für unsere Völker zurückzugewinnen.
And here's how the EU is tackling one of the main challenges facing Europe today, terrorism and radicalisation. Parliament approved a report calling for more Europe, as in more cooperation, because countries can't wage that fight alone.
The report focuses in part on so-called foreign fighters. Repeated terror attacks in the past 2 years lend further urgency to taking stronger action, says the report's rapporteur, Monica Hohlmeier of the EPP Group.
New thing is really the terrorist networks. They are mentioned for the first time here in this kind. And the new standards that are set are dealing with preparatory actions, as for example training to commit a terrorist attack.
The report urges EU member states to step up efforts to stop radicalization both online and off. It calls for more help for the victims of terrorism, including a one-stop web portal to provide medical treatment, counseling, and legal and financial advice, and a system alerting the public about an attack.
You need a crisis intervention mechanism already in place, because if a terrorist attack is starting, then you need a website where people are informed.
Finally, an issue where Europe can have more impact together than apart, the conflict in eastern Ukraine. The battles between the government and pro-Russian fighters has heated up again, threatening to turn into a full-blown crisis.
Parliament debated what more pressure could be brought to bear, whether to impose new sanctions on Russia. In a session she helped to organize, Sandra Kalniete, the EPP Group's spokeswoman on Ukraine, pointed a finger at Russian President Vladimir Putin.
There is an escalation of the Putin's war against Ukraine, a war in Europe which has already claimed more than 10,000 human lives.
She said with the Ukraine conflict, Putin is trying to make the EU and NATO irrelevant. She argued for maintaining sanctions against Russia and,
if Russian aggression escalates, we should prolong and further increase them.
That's it for now from Strasbourg. Find out more about the activities of the largest political force in Parliament by checking eppgroup.eu. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.